Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're starting our coverage of the second tournament of the 2019 Grand Prix. This is one of the tournaments that's feeding into the overall Grand Prix, which feeds into the Candidates Tournament being played next year, which I think everyone is aware. The Candidates Tournament, the winner of that will go on to play in the 2020 World Championship against Magnus Carlsen. So how the Grand Prix is set up, there are 4 tournaments. We already had one earlier in the year. This is the second one. There's going to be a third one in early November, and then the last one will be in mid-December. In each of these, there will be 16 players. This is a knockout tournament, which is different than some other tournaments where you play numerous games, and then depending on how you do against all of the field, then you have your ranking. This is very different. You knock someone out, you move on to the next round, and if you get knocked out, you are out of the tournament. So with that, there are 21 total contestants in the entire Grand Prix. You don't play all of the tournaments. You're only going to be playing 3 of the 4. So there are definitely competitors who did not play in the first tournament of the year. So they will be playing this tournament as well as the next 2. So that is the format. At the end of the entire Grand Prix, the top 2 finishers will end up going to the Candidates Tournament. If they don't qualify through this venue, there are other opportunities to go into the Candidates Tournament. But for those players who played in the first tournament and didn't do so well, they are definitely going to be looking to go and do extremely well in this tournament, because they know they only have this tournament and one others. They will have to sit out either the third or the fourth tournament. So that is a high-level overview of the structure. As far as the players, we have the top players in the world. Now, there are a few exceptions. Magnus Carlsen, he's not going to be here. He is the world champion, and so he declined playing in this tournament. Fabio Caruana, another player who he automatically has a bid into the Candidates Tournament. He will not be here. Ding Lian, he is one of the top players in the world, not going to be here. Vladimir Kramnik, he retired, so he's not going to be playing here. And then Vishy Anand, he is out of this tournament by his own personal decision. He was invited, just decided not to play. But other than that, we have all the top players in the world here, 16 of those. So we will go ahead and get started. Starting out with round 1, we will have coverage from every round of this tournament. MVL starts out with e4 and then c6, getting into the Caro-Kann. Knight f3, d5, and knight c3. This is the 2-knight variation, something we don't see that often from white in the Caro-Kann. Bobby Fischer used to play it when he was a child. Bobby Fischer was a child a very long time ago. High-level play, not something we currently see too often. Now in the main line, continues with bishop to g4. So for the just little bit of theory that we do have on the opening, this is going down the main line. Pawn to h3, and then the bishop takes here on f3. More common than the bishop coming to h5, because after pawn e5, pawn e6, very common in the Caro-Kann, then d4. This is just solidifying the center of the board here. Bishop to e2. White just has a really good setup. This light square bishop is just kind of hanging out by himself. The knight here can't come to f6. Very awkward as far as how black's going to develop his pieces. So at the end of the day, we do see Navara play bishop taking here on f3. MVL continues with the queen taking here on f3, and then knight to f6, and then bishop to e2. And this is a spot where I think e5 deserves a lot of attention, as all the players are looking at the games being played and see, hey, can I find a variation that may give me better chances in the future if I were to come across this. I think e5 is a move that a lot of players are going to be looking at. It forces this knight to move here. I don't think it's that great if black tries to do the same thing, attacking the knight. You could take here. The pawn takes here. After these knights come off the board here, you could centralize all the bishops. It doesn't matter too much. Black can't really castle on the king side because of queen to h5. There's just too much pressure here. Eventually, this is going to collapse with both of the bishops eyeing down here and the queen over here. White can easily castle. Doesn't have too many threats to worry about. Since black can't castle, I feel like White definitely has a stronger game here. You can also see that this knight here on b8 is not really involved into the game, would eventually like to come to c6, a little slower if it comes here to d7. Only has one bishop. White still has the bishop pair here. So all in all, I think e5 is a very good move, but decides to go ahead and play bishop to e2, getting ready to castle on the king side. e6 and then castle on the king side as we expected. Bishop to c5, opening up for his own king to castle on the king side as well. Now this does open for the pawn to come down to d4 if black does want to push in the center. We do see MVL bring his rook over here to d1 just to protect that a little bit. Bishop to d4, and this is where things get pretty interesting because there was a move not really expecting from MVL, but as we start to unpack a little bit, it's a fantastic move, and that is queen to f4. Now let's start to unpack exactly why this move here, queen to f4, is so powerful. The next move, MVL definitely wants to be playing to e5, attacking the knight here on f6. This is a discovered attack. The queen's going to be attacking that bishop there on d4. So really, if black wants to hold off playing his knight until the pawn comes up here, where would the bishop go? Well, you could definitely exchange material here if you wanted to, but this would be exactly what MVL's looking to do. He can take back with his pawn. This opens up the door for the dark square bishop. This rook here on d1 is now semi-open file to control the center of the board. This does not look like what black wants to do. He has no control. He has these pawns in the center of the board, but his minor pieces aren't doing too much. There's a lot of pressure that's going to be happening. There's no other real square except for c5 and b6. Both of those have problems. If we play bishop to c5, then pawn to d4, forcing the bishop to move again, maybe bishop to e7. Now pawn to e5, attacking the knight here, and then queen to g4. This starts to get really tricky as far as both of these bishops eyeing down here. You can't castle because bishop to h6. The pawn can't take here. If the pawn moves, all of a sudden the rook is going to fall. It's all not good from there. If we come back and say, what happens if the bishop comes back to b6? Well, then pawn up here to e5. Maybe the bishop comes to c7. Could move the knight if he wants to, but this does pin down the pawn. But from here, pawn to d4, just solidifying the center of the pawn chain. Castle on the king side, but now queen to g3. There's just so much pressure that white's starting to put over here with both of these bishops eyeing down on the king side. So as we come back, we do see Navara play correctly, and he plays pawn to e5. This does stop the threat of the pawn pushing forward, attacks the queen here on f4, and also supports the bishop on d4. Queen is forced to move, so the queen comes back here to g3. We see the pawn take here, and this is another really good move because a lot of players would look at this. They move their queen back here to g3, and immediately we take up here to g7. But the only thing that's going to happen is the rook's going to come to g8. This pawn's protected by the knight. The knight's being protected by the queen. The queen is going to fall back. All of a sudden, black has a semi-open file here that he's attacking with his own rook, eyeing down on the king side of white. Black eventually could castle on the queen side. Put both of his rooks here on the king side. All in all, it's not a great attack for MVL. So he recognizes this and instead plays pawn to d3. Yes, he's going to end up losing a pawn in that exchange, but he doesn't really care. Why? Because this opens up the door for his dark square bishop to get involved, and he knows more importantly than the material right now, it's getting his pieces involved into the attack. So from here, we see the pawn take, which is exactly what black really needs to do, is take the material and then hold on for dear life here. But then bishop takes on d3, just eyeing down more material here. So right now, it's on the h7 square. Black now plays knight to d7, then the knight comes back here to e2, attacking the bishop, also getting ready to come to the king side if MVL wants to. Castle on the king side for black. Not too worried about the exchange here. He already has given up the bishop pair. And remember, he's up material here. He has that pawn that MVL gave him, so he doesn't mind exchanging down. You always want to be exchanging down material if you can. So he said, yeah, if you want to take my bishop, that's completely fine. It's being protected by this pawn right now. The bishop does come up here to f5, attacking the knight, and the knight comes down here to c5. Now the issue I have with this is completely away from the action. Everything up to this is leading to the king side of the board, so having more material defending that is going to be extremely important. Had lots of different options. Pawn to g6 says, hey, get out of my house. If you want to exchange right here, that's completely fine. You don't have the bishop pair. I can retake it with my queen if I want. I can retake it with my knight. I have different options here. Even knight to h5 right now makes some sense, attacking the queen right here. Instead, decides to play knight to c5. The really only good option you have out of this is you can eventually bring it to e6. It's a little painful right now because this does block some of the squares that the bishop here on d4 can go to. Right now it's blocked. So the first thing I would be looking at if on MVL standpoint is, can I play pawn to c3? And this is a critical move as we look at it, because where can the bishop go to? Well, as of right now in this instant, the bishop is fairly blocked, but it can come down to f2. And this is a painful move. There's no real good way for white to really defend against this. The king can't take here because then the queen's going to come down, take that rook here on d1. And remember that queen on d8 is a critical square. So maybe queen comes to e3, just trying to centralize attacking the knight here on c5. It's going to have to get some material back here. But then knight to e4 check. Okay, well, that's going to be difficult to deal with. Maybe pawn to f5, attacking the bishop. Also, if the pawn moves, it's going to be a discovered attack on the king here. Queen takes, maybe pawn takes. This is all bad. Things are going to go extremely poorly for white. At the end, black's going to easily win this. Now, instead of the king taking, maybe the queen takes here. Still going to be the same thing. Queen comes down here, check. Even if there is an exchange right here, it's going to be very difficult for white to hold on to this. Black still has 2 rooks on board, does have just the overall material advantage. He has 7 pawns to the 5 pawns. With 2 rooks and 2 knights, should be very easy for him to win this. In the game, recognize this, and so after the knight came down here to c5, says, yeah, I gotta keep remembering this pawn to c3 here, but right now, the queen on d8, do need to be aware of that, and so does not play pawn to c3. Instead, decides to play bishop to h6, which is exactly what black is prepared for. He can now bring his knight back over to e6, and then he's in fine shape, still has to defend extremely well, but he misses that, and he plays knight to h5. That is definitely not what is going to help right now. We still have the continued pressure that white has. Hey, let's continue to pin down that material here. There's really only one option here, and that's queen here to h4. You don't want to bring it up any further because the queen could take it. But all the pressure that was there before, it's still there. Now, black feels this, and I feel like he panics a little bit, and he plays queen to d6. And he's attacking the bishop and says, hey, if you want to take my knight here, I'll take your bishop. The problem with that is white can easily take here on h5. After the exchange, that's exactly what white's looking for, because we do see the exchange right here. And then, oh yeah, remember that one piece that we were trying to attack earlier with pawn to c3? We couldn't do that because the queen here on d8 was defending that, because a bishop to f2 can no longer do that. So MVL plays pawn to c3. Black recognizes his earlier mistakes and at this point concedes in the game. So MVL play extremely good game. Don't see that 2-knight variation all too often. Seemed like he knew exactly what to do. On the other side, David Navara just didn't seem comfortable the entire game. Made some mistakes in the middle game, and at the end of it, only after 19 moves, ended up resigning with the bishop hanging out here. Just no place to go. So MVL takes a spot at the top of the leaderboard. Now, it's not over yet. This is a best of 2. So they will come back and play again. So could even things up. David Navara will have the white pieces. If there is a tie in any of these best of 2 series, then they go to tiebreakers. And they play tiebreakers if they They play a series of tiebreakers, and it gets quicker and quicker from a time standpoint. Eventually, they will play Armageddon. Hopefully, we get some Armageddon games that we can go over. Those are always fun. I'll go over exactly what that format looks like if we have one of those. But just know that David's not out of it yet. But knowing MVL just needs a draw, does look like with this victory, he has the upper hand going into what should be round 2 for him. So 16 going 8 and then 4 and then the final 2. So hopefully you guys enjoyed round 1 of this tournament. Remember, over the next few weeks, we will have coverage from every single round. I like to go through and find maybe some of the top players that are playing. Always good to commentate on those, or just some of the more interesting games that we saw. For these 2 players, we just didn't cover them in the first leg of the Grand Prix, so I want to make sure that we cover it in there. But thanks again for watching, and I will see everyone in the next round.